First Samuel 14, Holman Christian Standard Bible. That day, Saul's son Jonathan said to the attendant who carried his weapons, "Come on, let's cross over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." However, he did not tell his father. Saul was staying under the pomegranate tree in Migron on the outskirts of Gibeah. The troops with him numbered about 600. Ajihah, who was wearing an ephod, was also there. He was the son of Ahitub, the brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the Lord's priest at Shiloh. But the troops did not know that Jonathan had left. There were sharp columns of rock on both sides of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine garrison. One was named Bozez and the other Seneh. One stood on the north in front of Michmash, and the other to the south in front of Geba. So Jonathan said to his attendant who carried his weapons, "Come on, let's cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will help us. Nothing can keep the Lord from saying, whether by many or by few. Nothing can keep the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few." His armor bearer responded, "Do what is in your heart. You choose. I'm right here with you, whatever you decide." "All right," Jonathan replied. "We'll cross over to the men and let them see us. If they say, 'Wait till we reach you,' then we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come on up,' then we'll go up because the Lord has handed them over to us. This will be our sign." They let the Hebrews they let themselves be seen by the Philistine garrison, and the Philistines said, "Look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they've been hiding." The men of the garrison called to Jonathan, his armor bearer. "Come on up, and we'll teach you a lesson," they said. "Follow me," Jonathan told his armor bearer, for the Lord has handed them over to Israel. Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet, with his armor bearer behind him. Jonathan cut them down, and his armor bearer followed and finished them off. In the first assault, Jonathan and his armor bearer struck down about 20 men in a half-acre field. Terror spread throughout the Philistine camp and the open fields to all the troops. Even the garrison and the raiding parties were terrified. The earth shook, and the terror spread from God. When Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, they saw him panicking. They saw the panicking troops scattering in every direction. So Saul said to his troops with him, "Call the roll and determine who has left us." They called the roll and saw that Jonathan and his armor bearer were gone. Saul told Ahijah, "Bring the ark of God," for it was the Israelites, for it was with the Israelites at that time. While Saul spoke to the priest, the panic in the Philistine camp increased in intensity. So Saul said to the priest, "Stop what you're doing." Saul and all of the troops with him assembled and marched up to battle, and there the Philistines were fighting against each other in great confusion. There were Hebrews from the area who had gone earlier into the camp to join the Philistines, but even they joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelite men who had been hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they also joined Saul and Jonathan in battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day. The battle extended beyond Bethaven, and the men of Israel were worn out that day, for Saul had placed the troops under an oath. "The man who eats food before evening, before I have taken vengeance on my enemies, is cursed." So none of the troops tasted any food. Everyone went into the forest, and there was honey on the ground. When the troops entered the forest, they saw the flow of honey, but none of them ate any of it because they feared the oath. However, Jonathan had not heard his father make the troops swear the oath. He reached out with the end of his staff, and he was carrying and dipped it in the honeycomb. Then he ate the honey, and he had renewed energy. Then one of the troops said, "Your father had made the troops solemnly swear, 'The man who eats food today is cursed,' and the troops are exhausted." Jonathan replied, "My father has brought trouble to this land. Look at look at how I've renewed my energy because I tasted a little honey. How much better if the troops had eaten freely today from the plunder and took from their enemies, then the slaughter of the Philistines would have been much greater." The Israelites struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash all the way to Ajalon. Since the Israelites were completely exhausted, they rushed to the plunder, took sheep, cattle, calves, and slaughtered them on the ground, and ate meat with the blood still in it. Some reported to Saul, "Look, the troops are sinning against the Lord by eating the meat with the blood still in it." Saul said, "You have been unfaithful. Roll a large stone over here at once." Then he said, "Go among the troops and say to them, 'Each man must bring me his ox or his sheep. Do not do the slaughtering here, and then you can eat. Don't sin against the Lord by eating meat with the blood in it.'" So every one of the troops brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he built an altar to the Lord. Saul said, "Let's go down after the Philistines tonight and plunder them until morning. Don't let even one remain." "Do whatever you want," their troops replied. But the priest said, "We must consult God here." So Saul inquired of God, "Should I go after the Philistines? Will you hand them over to Israel?" But God did not answer him that day. Saul said, "All you leaders of the troops, come here. Let us investigate how this sin has occurred today. As surely as the Lord lives, who saves Israel. Even if it is because of my son Jonathan, he must die." Not one of the troops answered him. So he said to all Israel, "You will be on one side, and I and my son Jonathan will be on the other side." All the troops replied, "Do whatever you want." So Saul said to the Lord, "God of Israel, give us the right direction, the right decision." Jonathan and Saul were selected, and the troops were cleared of the charge. Then Saul said, "Cast a lot between me and my son Jonathan." And Jonathan was selected. Saul commanded him, "Tell me what you did." Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff I was carrying. I am ready to die." Saul declared to him, "May God punish me and do so severely if you do not die, Jonathan." But the people said to Saul, "Must Jonathan die who accomplished such a great deliverance for Israel? No, as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he worked with God's help today." So the people redeemed Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul gave up the pursuit of the Philistines, and the Philistines returned to their own territory. When Saul assumed the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies in every direction, against Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he caused havoc, and he fought bravely, defeated the Amalekites, and delivered Israel from the hand of those who plundered them. Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. The names of his two daughters were Merab, the firstborn, and Michal, the younger. The name of Saul's wife was Adhinoam, daughter of Ahimaaz. The name of the commander of his army was Abner, son of Saul's uncle Ner. Saul's father was Kish. Abner's father was Ner, son of Abiel. The conflict with the Philistines was fierce for all of Saul's days. So whenever Saul noticed any brave or strong man, he enlisted him.